I will choose to remain anonymous with this story, because honestly it is pretty embarrassing to look back on. And also, putting my name out there tied to this is likely a horrible idea. There was a Craigslist ad posted in 2017 by a guy named Jackson. He was advertising free lodging for a girl who would watch over his house and clean. Basically an au pair or nanny without having to watch any kids. I will just be honest that I kind of lost the will to do a lot when I was 21. I had zero relationship with my parents or sister, and I only had a handful of friends who I could trust. I dropped out of college my first year, which was part of the reason my parents hated me for a while, and I was working a dead-end job at a local vape shop. I like to just refer to this period of my life as my attitude era, and when I saw Jackson's Craigslist ad, it really caught my attention. It had about 10 pictures of his house. It looked like a modest middle-class house, slightly old-fashioned, honestly, but I was into that. The pictures were not what got my attention the most, though. It was the fact that free living was offered for a nanny-type position, and absolutely no background check was required. I did not even ask my family or friends their opinion on this post before I just decided to reply to it. Like I said, I was not exactly talking to my parents or sister at the time, and I felt completely isolated. Anyway, I texted the number on the ad, and this Jackson guy responded within a few minutes. I expressed interest in the listing, and just asked some basic questions about the daily responsibilities. He had an answer to everything that honestly made me feel more interested. But he asked pretty early on in the conversation what my gender was. When I said female, it almost seemed as though his responses got longer and more detailed. I honestly did not care. Most people tend to prefer having a female housekeeper or nanny, so I figured it was just a normal preference. Anyway, I was still interested, because anything that got me out of my parents' house was a win. He said he would not be home most of the time during the day because of his job, but he wanted to come home to a clean house, and that he also would not mind coming home to a cooked meal from time to time after work. Honestly, I was cool with that too. If it meant free housing, hell yeah, I will cook some food. It beats standing in the wage cage at the vape shop, breathing in sweet synthetic fruit vapor all day. Plus, he also said he would pay for the groceries. It was sounding almost too good to be true. He suggested I come by later that day to check the place out and see if it was a good fit. I said okay. A few hours later, I was on my way in my crappy little Honda Civic to the guy's house. It was in a perfectly normal side of town. The block actually seemed pretty calm and peaceful. The neighboring houses had flowers and decorations outside, suggesting the neighbors were normal too. It was a good start so far. I went to ring the bell, and when the door opened, I was greeted by a man larger and honestly older than I had pictured. I had pictured this regular 45-year-old dad-looking guy. Instead, it was a man maybe 60 years old, 6 feet tall, with a thick gray beard, and he was a little overweight. He greeted me with a big smile and immediately went in for a hug, even though we had just met. And honestly, the amount that he laughed made me feel pretty at ease. He showed me around the house. It was a 2-story house. The first floor was your basic kitchen, dining room, and living room setup. Then the upstairs was 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. He only showed me the guest room that I would be using and the bathroom upstairs, though. The other doors stayed firmly closed. He said if I ever needed to use the office across the hall, I was welcome to. Down the hall was his room, and another room that he did not explain at all. I was surprised to hear there was only 1 bathroom for the both of us, but I did not complain. Then there was the basement. He said it was unfinished, and that he did not use it for anything other than working out and doing laundry. That was the end of the tour. He did not show me the backyard that day. I told him I wanted the job, and he told me I was hired. 2 days later, I came back with my stuff packed in my Civic. I told my parents I got an apartment when they asked where I was going, and I did not explain anything more. The first night there was when I noticed the cameras. No, they were not hidden. At least I did not think they were supposed to be. They were just small black dome cameras mounted up in the corners of the living room and the kitchen. It made perfectly normal sense to me at first. He was letting basically a complete stranger live in his house, so it was not that crazy that he would want some security. Still, I wish he had mentioned it beforehand. That was the first time I felt even slightly weird about the situation. If you cannot tell, I really wanted this to work out, so I forced myself to ignore the bad feelings. That night, when I went to bed, I noticed how much noisier the house felt than when we toured it. I could hear the wood floors creaking every once in a while. At one point, I swear I heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere downstairs. I checked my phone, and it was around 1:30 in the morning. Again, I came up with a reason for this in my head. When you are laying in silence trying to sleep, you pick up on more sounds than you would when occupied by something during the day. Plus, every old house makes sounds like that. The next morning, he was already gone, like he said he would be. He had left a note on the counter with a list of things he wanted done. It was normal stuff. He wanted me to do his laundry, vacuum the floors, wipe down the kitchen, and stuff like that. I tried to just focus on the fact that I was not standing behind a vape counter all day anymore. I did his laundry first, then I cleaned the floors and wiped everything down. After that, I went back upstairs and started setting up the bedroom more like my own space. I unpacked my clothes, set up my laptop on a small desk, and put a few personal things around just to make it feel less temporary. I remember thinking, maybe this could actually work out. I was actually being positive for once. After I finished everything, I just relaxed for a while and watched videos on my laptop. Not hearing my parents yelling downstairs or having one of them burst through my bedroom door, barking orders at me was a breath of fresh air. The first week actually went pretty normal. At night when he got home, we would talk a little, like about basic stuff. It never really got deep. He asked about where I grew up, what I wanted to do eventually, stuff like that. I cooked dinner a few nights in a row, and he seemed to appreciate it. I started thinking, maybe I just overreacted about the cameras and the weird feeling in the night. But it did not all stay happy and peachy. One night, I made pasta with chicken and some vegetables. I tried my best, but I was not some housewife-type star chef. I was just some young, angsty goth girl trying to survive. When he got home, he looked tired and irritated. He took one bite and his whole face changed. He said it tasted completely bland. I said sorry and offered to add some seasoning or make something else, but he just kind of snapped. He said something like, if I was going to be living there for free, the least I could do was learn how to cook something edible. He pushed the plate away and stood up. Then he told me to clean up the mess I made in his kitchen before he walked away toward his bedroom. That caught me completely off guard. It was not even just what he said. It was how fast his personality seemed to change. He had seemed so easygoing before that. I cleaned everything up quietly and hoped that he had just had a bad day and nothing more. Everyone has bad days. The next morning, I actually apologized to him. I did not even really think I did anything wrong, but I wanted to keep things smooth. I told him I was sorry about dinner and I would try harder next time. He just laughed like it was nothing. Then he said something that made everything weird. He said maybe I could make it up to him by cleaning the house in my underwear that day. He said it with a smile like it was supposed to be funny. I remember just kind of freezing for a second, because I did not know how to respond to that. I told him I was not comfortable with that, to put it lightly. He just laughed again and said he was joking and told me to relax, and then he went to his bedroom. I remember standing there after he left feeling really unsettled. It was the first time I really thought maybe there was something off about him, beyond just being moody. That was the first time I texted one of my close friends about what was going on. I told her about the living situation and what he had just said to me. She immediately told me I was insane for staying there and told me to leave as soon as possible. I did not want to, though. As weird as it was getting, I still felt like I had more control over my life there than I did living with my parents. Going back there felt like failing again, and I was not ready to admit defeat. The next Monday, I was leaving the house to go buy groceries with some money he had left for me on the counter. As I was driving down the road, a car behind me started laying on the horn. I thought I did something wrong driving, but the car kept following me closely. I pulled over to the side of the road because I started getting scared that something was really wrong. The car pulled up right behind me, and a girl got out. She looked around my age. She walked up to my car window and asked if I was living at that house. When I said yes, She immediately told me I needed to stay away from that man. She explained that Jackson was not even his real name. She said she was the girl who had the exact same living arrangement before me. She told me she eventually realized he had cameras watching her constantly. She said she started noticing he knew things he should not know about her. She said when she tried to leave, he made it very difficult and kept asking endless questions about where she was going and when she was coming back. Then she told me one night she woke up in the pitch black and saw him leaving her bedroom. That part made me physically sick. Then she told me the absolute worst part. She said he did not even have a job. She said he lied about going to work every day, and she eventually realized he was still somewhere inside the house most days, hiding and watching her. I just sat there in my car, trying to process everything she was saying. Every little weird thing suddenly started making complete sense. I asked her how I could leave without causing problems or a big scene. She told me to act completely normal and to start slowly taking important things out of the house and putting them in my car so he would not notice. She said when I finally left, I should make it look like I was just running everyday errands, and she warned me not to confront him and not to let him know I knew anything at all. After she left, I just sat in my car for a few minutes trying to calm my breathing down before going back. When I walked back into the house, it felt completely different. I felt like I was being watched even more than before, and the air felt heavy. That night I checked my bedroom carefully like the girl had suggested, and she was right. After a few minutes of looking around the closet, I noticed something small on the top shelf. It was pushed away into the dark corner. When I moved a small cardboard box, I saw a tiny black camera lens pointing outward through a small drilled hole in the wall. I just slowly put the box back exactly how it was, pretending like I did not see it. Needless to say, I did not sleep at all that night. I looked into the darkness of the room, wondering what I had gotten myself into. And honestly, I am so glad I did not fall asleep that night, because at some random crazy hour in the middle of the night, I heard my bedroom door creak open. I quickly flipped to my side and looked toward the door. It was Jackson. He noticed me look at him, and he quickly apologized for waking me, saying he thought he heard a noise, and then he closed the door. I lay there trembling. What was that weirdo planning on doing? I knew right then that I needed to get out of there as fast as possible. The next morning, I started my plan. Every day I would bring one small, unassuming bag of my stuff to my car. Just normal things, nothing obvious. 3 days later, I left while he was supposedly at work, and I never came back. Though, if what that girl told me was true, who knows where he actually was. Maybe he was in the house somewhere, watching me leave. He texted me later that day asking where I was. I told him I decided to move back home and thanked him for the opportunity. He kept texting, asking why, and saying I should at least come talk to him in person. I never responded again. About a week later, I noticed something that still bothers me to this day. I got an email notification saying someone had tried to log into one of my old online accounts. The security details showed the login attempt was from the exact same town his house was in. I changed all of my passwords and security settings after that. I do not know what his real intentions were, and honestly, I do not want to know. Nothing technically happened to me. But I really believe if I had stayed in that house any longer, something eventually would have. If you ever see deals like that, offering free housing from strangers online, just remember that nothing like that is ever really free. Now that first story shows us how easily we can be lured into a trap when we are desperate for a place to stay. But this next story shows us that even if you live in your own home, completely alone, you are not always safe from the strangers you invite inside. Sometimes the danger slips through your front door under the guise of help and quietly makes itself at home without you ever knowing. The narrator of this second story hired a cleaning lady sometime around the beginning of last fall. He worked incredibly long hours at his job and lived alone in a modest 2-floor house that he had bought a couple of years ago. It was a relatively small house, but it was still far more space than he really needed for just himself. Because of his demanding work schedule, he started realizing he was falling way behind on keeping the place clean. No matter how much he told himself he would get to cleaning the house on his days off, he never seemed to be able to find the energy. One night after a long shift, he was just scrolling through Craigslist and other similar sites, and he saw a listing for house cleaning. It was just a simple post saying independent cleaner, cash only, with a flexible schedule. He figured, why not? Maybe this was exactly what he needed to get his house back in order. He sent an email, and she responded the very next morning. She said she usually did apartments but was perfectly fine doing houses too. They agreed on a day she could come by while he was at work. She asked a few normal questions like how big the house was, if there were any pets, and if anyone else would be home. He told her there were no pets, it was a relatively small house, and that he lived alone. Looking back, he wishes he had never mentioned that last part so casually. She came the following Thursday. He met her quickly at the house before leaving for his shift. And before you ask, yes, he hid anything of real value in his lockable office closet before leaving. The cleaning lady looked to be maybe 38 years old. She seemed very quiet. She did not really make eye contact with him much, but he just figured she was shy, or maybe just focused on the job. He showed her around the house quickly, pointing out all the rooms he wanted her to clean upstairs and downstairs. He explicitly told her she did not need to worry about his office room. She asked where he usually kept the cleaning supplies, and he showed her the laundry room. She asked if she could come regularly every couple of weeks, but he told her maybe. He wanted to see how this first cleaning went before committing. Before he left, she asked what time he usually got home from work. He told her around 6, or sometimes closer to 7, depending on the traffic. At the time, that did not seem weird to him at all, since she probably just did not want to still be working when he returned. When he got home that night, the place honestly looked great. The floors and counters were shiny, and everything smelled like fresh cleaning products. He paid her the cash they had agreed on. She thanked him, and she left. Nothing seemed wrong. For about a week, everything was completely fine. But then, about 6 nights later, the strange things started. He woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning. He was not a great sleeper anyway, so waking up in the middle of the night was not unusual for him. But what was unusual was that he thought he heard a soft, muffled thump coming from downstairs. It sounded like maybe something settling, or just one of those random house noises you hear at night. Put simply, he ignored it, just like most people do when they hear those kinds of sounds. A couple of nights later, he woke up again, and this time he heard what sounded like a cabinet door closing downstairs. Again, he just assumed he was half asleep and imagining things. He did not go downstairs to check. He definitely was not going to go walk around a pitch-black house at 3 in the morning over something that was probably just his imagination. He really wishes he had. Over the next week, he started noticing small things around the house that felt slightly off, but not enough to really alarm him at first. One morning, he walked into the kitchen and saw that a cabinet was standing open a few inches. He figured maybe he had left it that way without realizing. Another time, a chair at his dining room table seemed pulled out slightly from the table. Again, he assumed he must have done it and forgotten about it. One Saturday morning, he went into the downstairs bathroom and noticed that the hand towel felt damp. Small things like that kept happening. Just tiny details that you can always explain away if you want to keep yourself from panicking. Then, the nighttime sounds kept happening. They were always soft enough to explain away. Once, it sounded like a single slow footstep on the floorboards, but he convinced himself it was probably just the wood adjusting to the temperature. Still, he started sleeping with his bedroom door completely shut instead of cracked open like he usually did. He did not really want to admit to himself that he was getting uneasy, but he was. One night, he woke up and was almost positive. He heard movement right outside his bedroom door, like the sound of weight being shifted on the floorboards. He still did not get out of bed. He just lay there staring at his closed door, waiting to see if the handle would move. Yes, he was starting to get that paranoid. But nothing happened, and eventually he fell back asleep. The next morning, he felt stupid for even being scared. He checked the house, and everything looked completely normal. Around this time, he texted the cleaning lady again about coming back for a second cleaning. Overall, she had done a great job, and he figured he was just stressed from work and letting his imagination run wild. She came again on another weekday while he was at work. It was the same routine. He left the back door unlocked for her so she could get in. When he got home, everything looked clean again. She asked if he wanted to schedule something regular, and he told her maybe once a month. Anything more than that seemed like a waste of money to him. About a week after that second cleaning, he started noticing that his food seemed to be disappearing slightly faster than it should. He thought he was losing his mind one night, swearing to himself that there was at least one more yogurt cup in the fridge the previous night, and now it was completely gone. The slices of bread in the loaf seemed lower than he remembered too. He was still trying to explain these things away, though not wanting to think about the alternative. But one morning, he found a clean glass sitting in the sink that he was almost positive he had not used. He lived alone and was single at the time, so there really was not anyone else it could have been. At one point, he even wondered if he was doing these things in his sleep. He actually Googled articles about sleepwalking to see if that was a possibility. Things really changed one night when he woke up and clearly heard slow, deliberate footsteps downstairs. He knew what footsteps sounded like compared to normal house settling noises. These were definitely steps. He grabbed his phone and lay perfectly still, listening. After about 10 seconds, he heard what sounded like something lightly bumping into a wall downstairs. He did not go downstairs to investigate. He knows some people might think that sounds stupid or cowardly, but fear really does make you freeze sometimes instead of taking action. Or maybe he was just choosing flight over fight before even confronting the situation. He just stayed in his bed, sitting up for half an hour, not hearing anything else, and finally convincing himself once again that it was nothing. Looking back, he views himself as a coward for that. When morning came, he checked all the doors and windows. Everything was securely locked. He even forced himself to check his basement, even though he had never heard any noises coming from down there. It was completely clear. A few days later, he noticed something that really bothered him. In his kitchen, he had a junk drawer where he kept random things like batteries, pens, and takeout menus. He also kept 2 spare house keys on a small metal ring in the back of that drawer. He opened the drawer to look for them, and one of the keys was completely gone. He got goosebumps as he considered the obvious possibility, but he kept telling himself that it was not possible. He searched the entire house, but he could not find the missing key anywhere. The cleaning lady had been left completely alone in his house twice, for several hours each time. He started locking his bedroom door from the inside every single night after that. About 4 nights later, he decided he could not live like this anymore. He needed to test his theory. He got ready for work and left the house like normal, but after driving just a few blocks, he circled back and parked on the next street over. He walked back quietly, slipped in through his back door, and crept up the stairs. He stayed upstairs and just waited in the silence. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, he heard something. It was the distinct sound of his front door unlocking. Then he heard very soft footsteps coming inside. He crept quietly to the top of the stairs, positioning himself where he could see part of the downstairs hallway through the wooden stair railing. He saw a woman walk into the kitchen. She did not have any cleaning supplies with her. She walked in like she lived there, completely comfortable. She opened his refrigerator, took out a drink, and sat down at his dining room table. She sat there quietly for a few minutes, sipping the drink. Then she stood up and began walking slowly around his living room, looking at his things. She picked up a framed photo of him and his brother and just stared at it. Then she turned and started walking toward the stairs. He backed up as quietly as he possibly could into his bedroom and shut the door without making a single sound. He stood there, his mind racing, not knowing what to do. He did not want her to know he was home yet. After about a minute, he heard her footsteps walk halfway up the stairs and then stop. Through the gap under his bedroom door, he could see her shadow block the light. She just stood there, completely still, not moving a muscle. It felt like at least a full minute of pure agony. With his mind racing and adrenaline pumping, he decided it was now or never. He had to confront her. He grabbed the handle, unlocked it, and flung the door open. He was not expecting her to actually be standing mere feet away from the door, already looking directly at it. and now she was looking directly at him. But as he got a closer look at her face, he quickly realized that this was not the cleaning lady he had hired. It was another Hispanic woman. Yes, but her build, her hair, and her face were completely different. And there was something so bone-chilling about her expression. She had this blank, nearly angry, hateful look on her face. He did not say a word, and neither did she. They just stood there in the quiet hallway for a few seconds, staring at each other. Then, without saying anything, she slowly turned around, walked back down the stairs, and walked right out the front door. He heard the door click shut a few seconds later. His heart was pounding, and he was shaking violently. He was genuinely too nervous, and shook to move or say a single word during the entire encounter. He waited about 5 minutes before he could even move his limbs. When he finally did, dialing 911 was extremely difficult because of how badly his fingers were shaking. The police came and he explained the entire situation. He explained that there were 2 different women and that one of his spare keys had been stolen. He gave them the phone number and the email address of the original cleaning lady, along with any other information he could provide. The original cleaning lady stopped responding completely after that day, and her phone number was quickly disconnected. He went straight to the hardware store that afternoon and replaced every single lock on his doors. What still bothers him to this day is what one of the responding officers asked him before leaving. The officer asked if he had given anyone else a key, and when he said no, the officer remarked that sometimes people like that do not work alone. It is crazy to think about, but he never hired another cleaner again. These stories show us how dangerous it can be to let our guards down in our daily lives. But sometimes, the threat does not sneak into your home. Sometimes, the threat is waiting for you out in the open, using a simple, everyday item as bait to lure you into a dark, inescapable situation. And finally, let us look at what happened in the spring of 2008. It is crazy to think that 2008 was almost 20 years ago, but here we are. For anybody who is too young to remember, the early 2000s were sort of like the Wild West for the internet in many ways. Back in 2008, the narrator of this story was in his early 20s, and honestly, he was a bit reckless. He was way too trusting of people, and he was the king of saying things like, "That could never happen to me." He just never really had that sense of urgency or anxiety that other people had. That is, until one spring evening when he experienced firsthand that downright evil individuals really do exist in this world. Facebook had just started to blow up back then, but most people he knew were still using MySpace. Social media was a thing, but it was nothing like it is today. We had all heard horror stories about the internet, but nobody really cared, or more accurately, we were all just incredibly ignorant. He brings all of this up because perhaps the most insane thing about the internet at the time was a little website called Craigslist. Now, Craigslist is still around today, but it is nothing compared to what it was in the early 2000s. We did not have sites like Facebook Marketplace back then. So, if you wanted to buy or sell something, you went to Craigslist. You could find and purchase anything from small things to vehicles and everything in between. You could even find quick odd jobs for some extra cash. He had friends who used the site all the time and swore it was the greatest thing ever. He never had any interest in using it himself until his life started to unravel a bit in the spring of 2008. He was living with his girlfriend at the time, and with almost no warning, she broke up with him and kicked him out of the house. Thankfully, he was not living on the street because he had good friends who let him crash on their couches. He spent the days after the breakup trying to find his own apartment, but it was proving to be extremely difficult on his $7 an hour salary. One of his friends suggested he look on Craigslist for cheap rooms or apartments for rent, but surprisingly, that was a hard pass for him. He did not know why, but he just did not like the idea of renting a room from a stranger on the internet. However, he did start looking on the site for furniture to eventually fill his own place, whenever he managed to find one, since his ex-girlfriend had kept everything they owned. At first, it seemed like a treasure chest. He could find deals left and right. His buddy had a large garage and allowed him to store the furniture he was buying in there until he got his own place. One afternoon, he was looking for a small couch or a love seat. He found a post from a guy named Keith, who was selling a whole sectional sofa for just $45. The post included a picture, and it was a smaller sectional that looked like it was in great shape. The price seemed too cheap to be true, but he was young and ignorant, and he just saw a cool couch for a low price. He messaged Keith, and to his surprise, Keith messaged him back almost right away, saying the couch was still available. Keith seemed very friendly and trustworthy over the messages. He explained that he had gotten a new job in another state and was just trying to clear out his house quickly, which was why the price was so low. The explanation made perfect sense to the narrator, so they exchanged numbers and agreed to meet that evening to pick it up. It was a meetup that would go on to traumatize him for years and open his eyes to the true horrors that exist in the world. He pulled up to the house around 9 o'clock that night. That would probably be a major red flag for most people today, but it was not for him back then. Keith had told him he had some other work arrangements and could not meet any earlier, which seemed reasonable enough. But when he arrived, the house was completely dark, and it was not just because it was nighttime. The entire street looked desolate and run down, with almost no streetlights working. There were several houses on the block, and they all looked just as dark and abandoned as Keith's house. He sat in his truck and tried calling Keith several times using the number he had been given, but he kept getting an automated response saying the number was no longer in service. Just as he was about to put his truck in reverse and drive away, his phone buzzed. It was an incoming call from a strange number with a completely different area code. He answered, and he was greeted by a friendly but somewhat unnerving voice. The voice was deep and had an almost erratic energy to it. The man called him fella and started apologizing about the phone situation, claiming he had broken his personal phone earlier and was calling from his work cell. The narrator was definitely a little weirded out, but he was not scared or uneasy yet. He was honestly just annoyed that his time was being wasted. Looking back, he knows that hindsight is 20/20, but in the moment, your brain just works differently. He was not thinking about worst-case scenarios. He was just thinking about getting that $45 couch. Keith told him to meet him around the back of the house, saying he would unlock the back door from the inside. The narrator did not question it for a single second. He walked around the side of the building, and he could not believe how dark the backyard was. He figured the guy would have turned on some kind of outdoor light for him. He got to the back door and just stood there in the pitch black, unsure of what to do. He did not know if Keith wanted him to just walk inside, or if Keith was coming out to meet him. He decided to call the work number back. But instead of hearing a ringtone in his ear, he heard a physical phone ringing out loud nearby. The sound was not coming from inside the house. It was coming from the thick, overgrown bushes in the backyard. That was the very first time he felt a real, physical sensation that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, Keith ran out from the bushes, waving his ringing flip phone in the air. In that strange, energetic voice, he told him that he was just throwing away some old food in the yard and wanted to come out and greet him. He said he did not mean to startle him, claiming he liked to feed the squirrels and other animals that lived in the bushes. The narrator told him it was fine, and that he just wanted to see the sectional so he could load it up and leave. Keith cheerfully agreed and skipped past him toward the door, almost stumbling over his own feet as he did. This was the first time the narrator got a good look at Keith in the dim light. He was an older man, probably in his late 50s, very skinny, with long white hair pulled back into a dirty ponytail. And worst of all, he smelled strongly of a dirty ashtray full of old cigarette butts. They got to the back door, and Keith began struggling to get it open. The narrator found this strange, because Keith had said he was going to unlock it from the inside, but now he was trying to open it from the outside. Keith pulled away from the door and asked if he could help him, saying the door often got stuck in the frame and that he was embarrassed. He was not strong enough to push it open. He told the narrator to lower his shoulder and push the door as hard as he could. At this point, the narrator knew deep down that something was wrong, but he was already in the moment and just went with the flow. He grabbed the doorknob, lowered his shoulder, and prepared to shove the door with all his weight. But as he lunged forward to push, someone on the other side suddenly pulled the door wide open. With all his momentum carrying him forward, the narrator lost his footing and fell hard onto the floor inside the dark house. The moment his body hit the ground, he heard Keith scream the word "now." From the pitch-black corners of the room, two other men emerged and immediately pinned him to the ground. He began to squirm and fight back, but it did not matter. One of the men holding him down was absolutely massive, pinning his arms with crushing weight. In the complete darkness, the sheer terror of the situation was overwhelming, because he could not see who was attacking him or what they were doing to him. He felt a sharp, blinding pain as Keith began to kick him repeatedly in the face and ribs. As he lay there getting beaten, he heard Keith tell the other guy to grab the tape, followed by the distinct, sickening sound of heavy adhesive tape being ripped from a roll. He could not even begin to imagine what these men planned on doing to him once they had him bound in that dark room. But what happened next was nothing short of a miracle. During the frantic struggle of falling and being held down on the floor, the narrator's cell phone had accidentally speed dialed his friend, the one whose house he had been staying at. Suddenly, the loud, tinny sound of his friend's voice came through the speaker yelling, "Hello, hello, who is this? Is anyone there?" The narrator did not hesitate. He screamed as loud as he could, saying that he was in the back of the house, and for his friend to come inside and help him. It was a complete bluff, but it worked perfectly. The massive man holding him down immediately loosened his grip and looked up toward Keith, who had stopped kicking. That single second of hesitation was all the narrator needed. He gathered every bit of strength he had left, broke free from their grip, and scrambled out the open door. He ran through the dark yard, not looking back once, and threw himself into his truck. He slammed the door and locked it just as a shadow reached the vehicle. In the faint light of his dashboard, he saw the massive man clearly for the first time. The man was completely bald with a patchy, thick beard, and his eyes were dark, lifeless, and empty. He was aggressively pulling on the locked door handle, trying to get inside. The narrator started the engine, slammed his foot on the gas, and sped away from the house as fast as his truck would go. He drove around for hours, terrified that they might somehow follow him, before finally returning to his friend's house. He explained everything to his friend, and eventually contacted the authorities. But by the time the police investigated, the Craigslist post had been deleted, the phone number was an untraceable burner phone that had been discarded, and the house was completely empty. Keith and his accomplices had completely vanished. What scares him the most when he thinks about that night is their true intention. This was not a simple robbery. They did not demand his wallet, his money, or his truck keys. They had used a cheap couch as bait to lure a stranger into a dark, abandoned house, and they had brought tape to bind him. He knows he made incredibly foolish choices that night, but he is just thankful he was able to escape and live to tell the story. It is easy to think that these kinds of things only happen in movies, but the reality is that there are deeply disturbed individuals out there, waiting for the right moment to exploit our trust. Whether it is a free place to stay, a cheap cleaning service, or an unbelievable deal on a piece of furniture, we must always remember to keep our guard up and trust our instincts. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.